Hi, and welcome to today's Engaging for Missouri webinar. I'm Alice Roach from the Division of Applied Social Sciences at the University of Missouri, and I'll be your host today. With each of these 30-minute webinars, we intend to share research-based insights that leaders like you can apply in your own work to benefit and strengthen the state's agriculture and food system, hospitality sector, and communities. Today, Dr. Ray Massey will present about his research into custom rates for farm services. Before I invite Ray to begin, I want to share a few housekeeping notes. First, we'll close the webinar today with a question and answer session. Those of you who connected to today's webinar via your computer can submit your questions in the chat screen. So to open the chat screen, just click the chat button that you see at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you joined today by phone, then you can email me your questions at roacham@missouri.edu. Second, all attendees are muted and may not start their video. Third, if you encounter any technical problems during today's webinar, then you can let me know by either submitting a comment in the chat screen or by sending me an email at roacham@missouri.edu, and I'll do my best to help you troubleshoot. Fourth, we will make a webinar recording available to you. You can look for an email from Zoom sometime tomorrow that shares more about where you can access that recording. You can also find an archive of all of our previous Engaging for Missouri webinars on our division's YouTube page. So with that, we'll transition to the topic of today's webinar, which is titled Missouri Custom Rates for Farm Services, Uses and Misuses. Presenting is Dr. Ray Massey, who is an Extension Professor of Agricultural and Applied Economics. So thank you, Ray, for being here to present. If you could please unmute your microphone and start your video, then we can begin today's presentation.
All right, thank you, Alice, for having me and giving us this opportunity to go through the custom rate survey that was done in about January to March, actually. So we did it over a long period of time. So let me go ahead and just hopefully move my slides forward. Yes, there we go. Give some introduction on custom rate survey. So Missouri has conducted a custom rate survey since at least 1972, which is the furthest one I can find. And you'll notice the little picture that I put on the side, it has written in there 1972 because they don't do it like we do now. We always put the date in the title. We've done it approximately every 2 or 3 years. For the last 15, it's been every 3 years. But one of the differences is that this year, we conducted it by web, online. We did not do a mail-out survey as we have done in the past. We also use the extension professionals scattered throughout the state who go directly to individuals they know that are doing custom rates, and they help gather information for us. So it's either extension professionals gathering information or an online survey. But before I leave this first slide of the 1972 guide, I want to draw your attention to the very bottom where it says tillage. And it says moldboard plowing. We had 244 responses, which is a lot of responses. Plus, it's for an activity which we almost do not see very much of anymore in the state of Missouri. And so one of the benefits of this is it's showing us not just what's happening in the year that it's taken, but it's giving us a historical perspective. Another thing I'd show you is the third line down, disc plowing. We only had 6 responses, which is the problem that we are having today of not having a whole lot of responses, but apparently it was a problem for some activities even back in 1972. So with that background, let me just tell you a little bit more about what's happening in other states. So Oklahoma conducts a survey every 2 years. And they use the National Ag Statistics Service to do that. And what that means is that they will continue to ask questions until they get enough responses for some statistical validity, or they'll not report it. You'll find that I will report things that are not statistically valid. Iowa mails out a survey every year, but it's mailed out by ISU Extension rather than the Ag Statistics Service. They also have problems in getting a large number of responses, but they do that every year. Kansas conducts both a mail and an online survey by the Kansas Extension. They don't do it every year, but in the years that they don't conduct the survey, they will update the custom rates based on changes that are occurring in machinery, fuel, and labor prices. So that it's updated yearly, but it's not taken every year. And then Illinois, the other state that borders us, or one of the other states that borders us, doesn't even do a custom rate survey. Rather, they publish machinery cost estimates for the same field activities, and they're just using engineering equations, current prices of fuel, labor, and equipment. And in that, they have assumptions about how many acres that equipment's going to be used on. And so it's good information, but it's a little bit different. But what this really shows you is that most of the states surrounding us in some way present custom rate information or machinery information. So it's highly sought after, but it's obtained in different ways, and each one has their strengths and weaknesses, their pluses and minuses. And so that's some of what I hope to cover today is how would you use this information appropriately. And I might mention also, when I do the custom rate survey, I will be looking at particularly the Iowa and Kansas survey and comparing our numbers to theirs just to see how relative they are, how close they are. And for the most part, they're pretty close. So what that encourages me about is if we don't have a rate reported for Missouri, I really don't have a problem of going to Kansas and Iowa and probably grabbing one of their rates and using it, even though there may be quite a bit of difference between the practices that happen in both Kansas and Iowa from here. They tend to be fairly close. So here's table number 2 in our custom rate guide for this year, and I just want to use it to kind of go through what's reported, how you should think about it, and pros and cons of it. So again, reported in tables. This is table number 2. Table number 1 would be the tillage activities. Table number 3 would be harvest activities. So we just have different activities that are growing. But what I want to bring out to your attention is on the very far left, we have the types of activity that are going on. So corn and grain sorghum planting only, or plant and apply fertilizers. The next column is the average rate, which is a simple average of all of the number reporting, which is the last column. So on the last column, you'll see that we had 24 reporting respondents for corn and grain sorghum planting only. As a pointy-headed analyst, I would say 24 is not a very good response rate. There's no statistical validity there. But again, having compared it to other states, which do have higher response rates in some categories, and comparing it to previous years as we're looking at the increases or changes really in fuel, labor, and equipment prices, the average rate is in line with what we would expect. So it's not statistically valid or significant, but it is in line with what we'd expect. Because we have few reporting and custom rates really are not the same on every field. You know, you go to one field and it'll have a different set of circumstances, whether it's rockier or smaller or further away. We report the range in rates. And so we have always reported the lowest and the highest. We usually report the mid. And so the mid is a very good estimate of the average. And so I would encourage you, if you're looking at this, if the mid, which is $18 for corn and sorghum planting only, is similar to the average, which is $17.65, there's some confidence that we are close, that we're not out of line. So the average and the mid are the two that most people are going to be looking at. What I did this year, because I don't like the few number of responses, is I reported not just the extremes of low and high, but the second lowest and the second highest. And again, that first response there, the highest is $35 and the second highest is $22. And what that indicates is that the $35 one is pretty far away from the next one. Whereas on the lowest, we have $10, and then the second lowest would have been $10. So we have two reports of $10. I have a little more confidence on the low end than I do on the high end. So it's just giving you an idea of what the responses are. But the next line, I only have 3 responses. I don't report the second and lowest and the second highest. That is because we tell the respondents that we're not going to present individual data. And if I put the second lowest and the second highest, you wouldn't have everybody's data, or you'd be able to calculate everybody's data. So it's been obscured a little bit. But what you're looking at probably is the average or the mid rate, but I would also pay attention to the ranges there to make sure that they're not out of line. At the same time, understand if somebody's going to have to travel 10, 15 miles to capture a 5-acre piece of land, he might be charging a high rate, and that's what's getting reported. So the other thing is that the previous one, it was all on a custom or dollars per acre. You do need to look at that average rate behind it. It gives the unit, and sometimes it's on a cubic yard or a per hour, or it's on a linear foot and a per hour, or it's on a per bale instead of a per acre. For the most part, work is best charged on a per hour basis. So if I'm a business and I could charge it on a per hour basis, I'm actually making sure that I'm covering my cost. But farmers tend to like to know, hey, what is it going to cost me per acre? And I don't want you lollygagging around or something of that nature and taking more hours. And so they're mostly reported on a per acre basis. If you're having a pond built, some of them will say, I want to know how much it's going to cost. I know how many cubic yards you're going to move, so tell me what it is on a per cubic yard or a per linear foot for a terrace. But businesses would probably prefer to report on a per hour basis, and so some of them do. What I've got here is that the custom rate is a mixture of the machinery involved, the labor, and the fuel. And this is not our custom rate guide. This is the University of Illinois Farm Doc cost of doing different activities. And I'm using it to show you that what they show is at the very far right, labor. The next column to the left is fuel and lubrication. And then the 2 other columns to the left are the combine and the platform, or the equipment and the power unit. And so those are the 3 things that are normally in a custom rate: the machinery, the fuel, and the labor. And so when you talk to somebody about doing a custom activity, they supply the machinery, they supply the fuel, and they supply the labor usually. But this is a fun slide from the University of Illinois, because they're reporting it not just on how much does it cost per acre of corn to combine. They're actually saying if I had a 320 horsepower combine, or a 470 horsepower, or a 540 horsepower combine, what's the cost? And interestingly, you'll notice that the smaller combine has a higher cost of $40.80 total per acre, whereas the large combine has a $32.80 price per acre. Again, the reason I wanted to put this up is it shows that even the equipment being used can affect the cost. One of the interesting things to me, as we're going to larger and larger equipment, is the labor actually decreases as you get larger equipment. The fuel decreases as you get larger equipment. So it's not just that the cost of the piece of equipment is going up, but you're saving money on labor, fuel, and then, key here, if you use it on the number of acres that they say you're going to use it per year, you can actually get the equipment cost down. So a key when you're looking at their information is that one column that says acres per year. They're going from 1140 for the small combine all the way up to 1890 for the large combine. If they're not able to get those acreages per year, their equipment costs are going to go up. But this kind of information helps know what is involved in a custom rate. By the way, our custom rate would say that combining corn is about $34 an acre, which is kind of on the low side of their cost estimate. So you just have to ask, do we all have large equipment? I don't think so. Is there something else occurring? I do think that's what's happening. So I mentioned that it's machinery, labor, and fuel involved. There are a few that have other materials associated with it. So this is table 3 here, your fertilizer. And we make it very clear that to deliver and spread fertilizer does not include the cost of fertilizer until you get down to lime. And then with lime, we say, yes, it may include the cost of lime if it's delivered and spread from the supplier. So that's one of them that's an exception. The other exception would be baling, or in forage activities, they'll supply the twine and the net wrap. But for the most part, there are no other supplies given by the custom operator. So how do you use these? The way that I suggest using them is you might start negotiations with a custom rate, but you don't end negotiations with custom rates. The survey gives you information on what some businesses are charging or what they're paying, but it doesn't give you that full range like I tried to bring out with the Illinois combine data, or as we look at the range that's reported in our data. So these are not something that you say, hey, the University of Missouri says it's $20 an acre, and that's what I'm going to pay. That would be an improper use of them. But you could begin to say, hey, I'm planning, what might I expect to be paying? And at that point, I think our custom rate survey does give you a good place to start for planning, for putting in budgets, for taking to the bank and saying, hey, this is what I think I'm going to need for money. But you're still going to have to negotiate with whomever you're either providing the service for or getting the service from. With regard to custom rates, they are not for determining the cost of performing activities with your equipment. Again, that Illinois example was to show that your equipment, whether it's the size or the number of acres or the cost of that equipment, are going to affect the cost for you. I did mention Illinois, but Minnesota probably has the best equipment cost data. And so I would encourage you to go to this website, and Alice will be putting this presentation up on the screen, or up on the internet here in a little while, so you'll be able to get it. But it's just Bill Lazarus, or William Lazarus, at the University of Minnesota. He has great information that will help you figure out the cost of owning your particular piece of equipment and operating it on the number of acres you operate. So the custom rate does not tell you what it costs for you to do your work. It might give you an estimate that you could use for other activities, but not for sure cost. Then I want to give just one story here. I think that the custom rates are good for investigating alternatives. And you see a bunch of folks sitting here. We're actually in Argentina, and in 2018 and in 2017, we took a bunch of students to Argentina. I just want to say thanks to the Missouri corn growers and Missouri soybean growers. They helped give scholarships to these guys. But in this picture, we're sitting on about a 2,000 acre hacienda. And in the middle of the table, you can't really see the manager of the table, but he and I are sitting in the middle of this table. This is it's kind of like you see in the movies, a really nice setup with a house and barns and everything. He's got somebody cooking barbecue for us. But as we're sitting there, the manager of the hacienda points at a lawnmower, a riding lawnmower, and he says, that's the only piece of equipment I own. And, we're all saying, what? You've got 2,000 acres here and you only own a riding lawnmower? And as we went and looked at his farm, he has some of the finest equipment around on his farm. He's using high quality equipment for planting, for spraying, for field work, for for harvest. So it's not that he doesn't have it, but 100% of his activities were done with custom rates. And so here's a publication that was published in 2012, but it's still true, at least in 2018 when we were talking with him. And I've highlighted some things in blue here, in which for the numbers, the left column would be the heartland, which would be Iowa, Missouri, Illinois. And then the third column over is the northern heartland for Argentina, which is where we were at. And notice that his custom operations cost was 42, or in this USDA publication, custom operations is $42, whereas the Americans would normally spend about $6. But he had no fuel, he had no repairs, he didn't have any capital recovery on his machinery and equipment. He did have more labor, he had more unpaid labor as well. But the total of the blue boxes, which would be field activity expenses, for Argentina comes to approximately $100, whereas for the heartland of the United States, it's closer to $125, $130. And so they're saving $25 or $30 an acre because they're using custom activities as opposed to owning their own equipment. And so one of the values of this is just to look at that as well. So for our custom rate survey, I want to say thanks to all the commodity organizations and ag associations that helped encourage their members to complete it. We do value the responses that we get. It's getting difficult to get responses. I want to assure you that all the responses are confidential, no identifiers are maintained. But if you want to be alerted on the next custom rate survey, send an email to massey@missouri.edu with the custom rates alert in the subject line, and we'll put you in the next custom rates survey. And Alice, I'm going to stop right there.
Great, Ray, thank you. If you have a question for Ray, please go ahead and submit it in the chat screen, or you can also send it to me via email at roacham@missouri.edu. Ray, to kickstart our discussion, I'm hoping you can give us some context about who typically responds to the survey. Is it just producers, custom operators, or who else is included?
Actually, it's both. So we do have quite a few producers, and for the most part, for a large part, I'm not sure about the most part, for a large part, when the extension professionals go out and help gather information, they're gathering a lot from producers. Several of the people that apply or submit online are members of the Soybean Merchandising Council or the corn growers or even the beef producers, and they'll get an email that says, hey, respond to this, and they're responding to that. But we do have two associations, and that would be the Missouri MOAG Industries, and also the land improvement contractors, who send this out to their people and say, please fill it out, and do a great job of trying to promote it to people that are doing the work.
Great, thank you. You mentioned whenever you were talking about how to use averages versus ranges and interpreting data. So you mentioned that the conditions for a field, like its size and location, will vary. And so you report those averages and ranges to accommodate those differences. What are the respondents asked to report? Do they report averages? For instance, if they're a custom operator, do they report the average charge or the average fee that they charge? Or do they also report ranges themselves?
They just report the average. So if it's a farmer, for the most part, if he had planting done, he's got a single charge that he was paid. But if it is a custom operator, they will change based on how far they have to go, different activities that they may have to perform. But we're just asking them to present one. That would be their most common charge.
Okay, great. To what extent have Missouri custom rates changed in recent years, and which component of total cost, like whether that's the machinery, fuel, or labor, has tended to change the most?
Okay, so when you break down the custom rate charge into machinery, fuel, and labor, I did an analysis of the Minnesota data. So this is Minnesota's cost of owning equipment, but it's using our types of things. You know, it's a chisel plow or a planter or a harvester. And as a rule of thumb, about 70% of the cost is power and equipment. And then 15% of the cost would be fuel. And then 15% of the cost would be labor. So 70% for power and equipment, 15 fuel, 15 labor, to get 100% of the cost. When I did this back in about 1995, it was closer to 50, 25, 25 instead of 70, 15, 15. So as we're getting larger pieces of equipment, that is becoming a larger component of custom rates, but those are also allowing us to go over more acres per hour at a more fuel efficient rate. And so that's knocking it down as well. So rule of thumb, it's not true for everyone. It changes for some activities, but about 70% power and equipment, 15% labor, 15% fuel. And another change that's occurred besides just the percent of mix in the cost is we're seeing that different activities have been discontinued. So for example, I mentioned moldboard plowing. We're seeing an uptick in other activities. Sadly, we don't get very many responses to them, but manure activities, precision guided activities, those are starting to come up, and we're trying to get a good enough database of people that do that to get an idea of what it costs for activities that weren't done 20 years ago.
Great, thank you. Other than cost, what are some other factors that custom operators should consider when they're communicating about their rates? So they're selling their services essentially. And what are some considerations other than cost that producers should make whenever they're hiring custom operators?
So the one thing that most bothers producers and is most challenging for operators is timing. We always want to be the first ones to have our field harvested or planted exactly on that right time. Otherwise, the rain's going to come or something of that nature. So timing is a real critical aspect to discuss when you're asking for somebody to do a custom activity for you. What kind of, I guess, preferential treatment or priority are you able to obtain so that you know that they'll be there and they won't be somewhere else? Having said that, there's just almost no way to guarantee a time because of the weather that's going on. But the discussion does need to also include, do you have enough equipment to do this? When you do it, how long is it going to take? Are you going to be able to be here this week if the conditions are right? Those are really critical issues, and they're probably what keep most people from using custom operators.
Great, thank you. To what extent have responses tended to vary by geography here within Missouri? So are responses and then the averages that are being reported different in northern and southern Missouri, for example?
Actually, the responses to questions is different. So we're going to get more responses to forage activities in the southern part of the state, more responses to combining up in the northern part of the state. Sadly, we don't have enough data points to actually say it's more expensive or less expensive to do forage in the north versus the south. It would be nice if we had that much data, but we don't. I just know that we get more responses for some activities in a different area of the state. If we had enough data, we would actually report it by a region. But at this point, we don't have enough data to report to see a difference in the average by region.
Great. Well, thank you, Ray. It's time to close today's webinar presentation. We appreciate you being here to present today, and thank you to our audience too. When you exit Zoom, you'll see a post-webinar survey will load in your browser. If you could please consider responding, we'll use the results to improve the webinar experience and also brainstorm future webinar topics. Again, you should receive a recorded copy of today's webinar via email within about a day from now. Our next Engaging for Missouri webinar is on Wednesday, June 17th. At that time, Wesley Tucker will share a presentation titled Steps to Prepare Your Kids to Take Over Your Farm Business. Again, thanks so much for joining us today and have a great Wednesday. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you.